All right, football world, it's Bucky Brooks, and I am here with our fantasy expert, Marcus Grant, and we are going to do kind of a crossover pod where we're going to talk a little reality, a little fantasy, put it all together, and help you get ready for your fantasy football season. So, Marcus, last time we were on the show, we talked about quarterbacks, we talked about running backs and wide receivers, but today I want to talk about um, some different positions. We want to talk about the tight ends. We want to have a brief discussion about kickers, and then we want to put together a team, an ultimate team that people could get excited about. But when we last chatted, we were talking about tight ends because we ended talking about Sam Laporta. But I want to talk about the tight end position. One, are tight ends undervalued in the fantasy football world?
I don't think so. I think if anything, we love tight ends. There just aren't enough of them to go around in a league right now. I mean, I think we're at a point where the position is deeper than it has been in a long time. But even then, you're still looking at maybe 6 or 7 guys that you feel very confident you can count on. Then there's another, 5 or 6 guys that, are hit or miss depending on the week. And then there's a whole bunch of guys who are just question marks. You just don't know what you're going to get. But you know what? That's better than it had been because for a while you look at tight end and it was Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, George Kittle, and then if you didn't get one of those guys, you were sort of out of luck. So now we at least have a deeper roster of guys that we can go to and at least you can feel pretty confident that you've got a steady quality contributor most weeks.
Yeah, that's really important. And as more teams, and we'll see this bear out with the trends, as more teams go to 12 personnel packages, one back, two tight ends, you're going to see more tight ends have opportunities. We know about the Raiders and what they're doing with two tight ends. We've heard about what the Buffalo Bills want to do with Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox. And so, as we're looking at this kind of evolution of the tight end position, who are some of the tight ends that you're really vibing with?
Well, I love to make sure I get myself a good one early. But like Trey McBride has been really popular down in Arizona. He was the guy who basically made Zach Ertz expendable in the desert there. You mentioned Dalton Kincaid, who I mean, look, Bucky, he destroyed
Hmm.
USC on multiple occasions. And so like at that point, I was just like, well, this is a guy I guess I'm drafted in fantasy. And here's the this is a lightning rod, but like I'm still in on Kyle Pitts, and at some point, at this point, you have sort of planted your flag on how you feel about Kyle Pitts. Either you are
Hmm.
in, like I'm in, or you just decided that what he's burned me too many times, and I can't do it. But this is for me. If it doesn't happen this year with Pitts, it's never going to happen. Um, they got the quarterback upgrade in Kirk Cousins. He's apparently healthy after maybe not being healthy the last year or so. And last year, everybody was frustrated with the way Arthur Smith decided to use him. That's not going to be an issue anymore. So everything that we would have wanted for Kyle Pitts is coming together. So I am totally back in. I can't say I'm back in because I never really left. So I'm still in on Kyle Pitts, drafting him, especially if I can get him, in the 6th, 7th round where he's going right now.
Yeah, no, Cal Pitts is a guy that everyone has been waiting on. I feel like there's been a love affair with him because so many of us feel for the hype. So many of us have talked about him when he came in. We thought he was going to be one of the tight ends to revolutionize position, and we have blamed Arthur Smith for his lack of production. Now you have Zach Robinson coming in. They have Kirk Cousins. They can throw it all over the yard. Michael Penix as a backstop. They should have every opportunity to throw it all over the yard and get it done. So now here's where I need your help because there are a couple of we talked about 12 personnel teams with two tight ends. Both tight ends are good. So we know in Baltimore, Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews. That's an intriguing one. Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox. But I'm really worried about Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave in Green Bay. For a team that doesn't have a true number one receiver, the tight ends kind of act as that number one receiver on sometimes. What did I make of it to pick between one of those guys?
I I tend to lean toward Luke Musgrave, but I'm not necessarily steady on that because of Tucker Craft. And I feel that way about the wide receivers too in Green Bay. I mean, everything about that Packer offense. It's one of those things where having all these options in real football is great because it makes you hard to defend, right? You can't focus on one guy. In fantasy, it is the worst because you can't focus on one guy. So everything about the Packer offense makes me nervous in terms of fantasy. So my answer to the Packer offense has just been draft Jordan Love, right? Because you don't have to worry about which receiver is catching the ball, which tight end is catching the ball. You get all of that with the quarterback throwing the football. You get all those touchdowns, you get all those yards, but it really is a roll of the dice if you were going to draft a Packer skill position player, and that includes Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave.
Yeah, look, it's a tough one. It's a tough decision to make when you're trying to figure out those guys and some of the other tandems that we've talked about. But one thing that isn't tough is if you have an opportunity to get Travis Kelce, you have to go with the Swifty, don't you? You have
You
to
still
pick
have to, yeah.
Swifty and
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
right.
yeah. You're still drafting Travis Kelce. It's this is the first year in a long time, maybe since the last days of Gronk, that we aren't talking about Travis Kelce as the number one tight end because Sam Laporta has surpassed him there. But Travis Kelce still brings a ton to the game. I mean, look, last year we called it a quote unquote down year for Travis Kelce, and he was still the number two tight end in fantasy. Now they have more options. They have more things for people to pay attention to. Because last year the story was, well, who are the Chiefs' wide receivers? They don't have any wide receivers to make plays. They go out
Mhm.
to get Hollywood Brown. They draft Xavier Worthy. I mean, Rashee Rice showed us some things near the end of last season. So now all of a sudden, you do have these other options in the passing game, which means you can't completely focus your defense on Travis Kelce. So yeah, he's maybe not the same guy that he was a few years ago, but Travis Kelce is still among the elite tight ends, both in real football and in fantasy.
Yeah, so one of the guys that kinda popped up and was really productive after Joe Flacco arrived was David Njoku.
Mhm.
W What do I do with David Njoku now that Deshaun Watson is going to be back as a starting quarterback and Ken Dorsey is taking over as the play caller?
Yeah, I mean, so last year what we saw out of him with Joe Flacco was kind of what we were hoping for all these years, right? I mean, just a big athletic tight end. It never really seemed to come together. Finally, Joe Flacco figured out how to unlock it. And so part of me thinks, okay, maybe the Browns saw something and they will figure out how to get him the football. Part of me worries though, because Deshaun Watson has not
Mhm.
been very good, since he's joined Cleveland. So I'm sort of tempering the expectations. I think the fact that it's built in that right now Njoku's like a ninth round pick, it sort of mitigates a lot of the risk there. But I'm willing to believe that what we saw at the end of last season was actually the start of things. And look, I mean, this is what we're coming up on year 8 now for Njoku, I think it is. Um, it's not unprecedented that you get a guy deep into his career has a breakout because last year Evan Ingram was sort of that guy, right? Evan
Mhm.
Ingram had been that guy that a lot of us had kind of written off, and all of a sudden he has a career year in Jacksonville. So who's to say that David Njoku can't do something similar this year in Cleveland?
Yeah, speaking of Evan Ingram, what are your thoughts on Evan Ingram and this offense down in Jacksonville? Like, they kinda believe less is more. Kevin Ridley walks. They bring in Gabe Davis. They add a young player in Brian Thomas Jr., but Ingram is kind of the number one. He and Christian Kirk share the marquee. What do you think about Evan Ingram's prospects?
Yeah, I think so. What I love about Evan Ingram is that he had a ton of targets last year. What I didn't love about Evan Ingram is that the average depth of target wasn't very deep. I mean, he averaged 8 yards per catch. So I mean, they were basically extended handoffs, is what they were giving him. I always say this with when I have whether it's a receiver or a tight end, in fantasy. You don't love it when your guy catches the ball and the blue line of scrimmage line is still on the screen, and that was kind of Evan Ingram a little bit last year. So that kind of worries me a little bit, but I think the volume sort of keeps him afloat. Now, also, I think one thing to keep in mind is that a lot of that came because they had injuries, right? I mean, because
Mhm.
Christian Kirk was banged up for a while, Calvin Ridley, was not 100% a lot of times. So that is something to sort of keep in mind that, will he get those same targets if everybody's healthy? But I do think he and Trevor Lawrence found something that works together, and I think he's going to get the ball a lot, and that's going to kind of keep him afloat.
Yeah, it certainly will keep him afloat. He's someone that finds a way to get it done. And speaking of getting it done, one of the I would say the hidden gems in fantasy football is the kicker position. I know it's one of those things that you talk about, like how important it is. It used to be a throwaway position. Well,
Yeah.
now it's important. Give me your philosophy on kickers and why it is a more important piece of the championship puzzle when it comes to building a fantasy team.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's overlooked. I mean, I think some people get frustrated because there is, admittedly, a little bit of randomness involved in kickers, right? Because basically, if if a team's coming out to kick a field goal, generally it's because the offense has stalled. I mean,
Mhm.
obviously you have those late game situations, that's different, but so there's a little bit of randomness to it. But when you have a guy who has a big leg and can kick from deep, then it means something. I mean, there's a reason Justin Tucker has been a star in this league for a long time. There's a reason we talk about, Evan Money McPherson in Cincinnati, because these guys potentially are game changers. And so I tend to be of two minds. One, I will, first off, whoever it is, always wait till late. You're talking about one of your last couple of picks in the draft before you're getting your kicker, first of all. But if you want to go for those elite guys, you go get one of those elite guys. I mean, last year Brandon Aubrey looked great in Dallas. I mean, you can always go. You can't go
Mhm.
wrong with Justin Tucker, Harrison Butker, those kind of guys on offenses that are going to move the ball and always be in scoring position. But if you can't get one of those elite guys, I will tell you that maybe don't draft a kicker. Spend that last pick on another skill position guy, because what's going to happen is, I mean, you may cut that guy in week one, but spend it on a skill position guy that maybe is kind of a deep sleeper. You'll get to week one, you'll look at your roster and you'll say, okay, maybe this last round guy, look, maybe he worked himself into a role, and I can give him a shot and I can cut somebody else. Or if it doesn't work out, send that guy back to the waiver wire, find yourself a kicker for that first week, and then kind of move from there. But I don't think you can overlook kickers. I'll also say there are a lot more leagues that are starting to factor in kickers a little bit. I'm in a big charity tournament, the Scott Fish Bowl, where they've kind of worked it out where your kicker can maybe be a little bit more valuable than, say, a late round running back or wide receiver, especially a guy who kicks from deep. So check your scoring system, because you may be able to find a hidden advantage in there if you can get some kicker points.
Yeah, kicker points are very, very valuable, and if you can find those offenses that struggle but are just good enough to get the ball to the 35-yard line when you have a long distance kicker, it is a big win. Let's talk about some of the rookies. Who are some of the rookies that you're high on?
Well, I think all three of those top wide receivers, right? When you're talking about, uh, you know, obviously Marvin Harrison Jr. Is maybe the big name off the board there, but Malik Neighbors is one that we're certainly interested in. Romo Dunze, I think he's got a little bit of a tougher path just because he's got, DJ Moore and Keenan Allen there in Chicago. So he's going to have to share some targets a little bit more, but the talent is certainly, undeniable. And you mentioned Brian Thomas in Jacksonville. I think he's another one there.
Mhm.
So the rookie wide receivers, I think are really, really intriguing this year. I mentioned on the last show, Jonathan Brooks, that a guy I love, because I just love what Carolina is doing to try and support Bryce Young this year. So I do like him. A deeper name though, at running back, Ray Davis in Buffalo, because
Mhm. Yeah.
um the Bills, I mean, they like James Cook, but I don't think they want to make James Cook a workhorse. And I think they would like to use him more as kind of a pass catching back and use Ray Davis as more of the hammer. So I think he could be the guy. I won't say he's the goal line back, because that's going to be Josh Allen, and so he can't do it anymore. But I do think he's going to get some opportunities there. So Ray Davis is a name that I have been drafting late in drafts. And I also put Blake Corum in that bucket too,
Love
with
it.
the Rams, because I don't think Sean McVay wants to use a one workhorse back. He did it last year and it worked well with
Mhm.
Kyron Williams, but I don't think they would prefer to do that. And so I think Blake Corum is going to have a really nice role, and if he has a really good training camp, maybe that role is bigger than we think it's going to be.
Yeah, I love that tandem, and I love what the Rams are doing when it comes to bringing 2, backs that have similar traits and just grinding it out and being able to really throw complimentary passes to the outside. So Blake Corum was one of my favorites in the draft, and I love how Kyron this can develop. I'd be interested to see how they deploy both of these guys. When it comes to the rookie wideouts, there's been a lot of conversation about Marvin Harrison Jr. being the number 1, and everyone is excited about him. But outside Marvin Harrison Jr., who are the first year pass catchers that you're really high on?
Look, I'm starting to come around on Malik Neighbors. My hesitation with Malik Neighbors was more about the quarterback situation with the Giants. Whether it was going to be
Mhm.
Daniel Jones or Drew Lock, that sort of made me a little bit nervous. But I'm starting to just believe that he's going to be the number one guy and he's going to get a lot of targets there. So I'm in on him. I've been big on Lad McConkey. I think he's going to be a good fit in that Chargers offense. We mentioned last show. I think they're going to throw the ball maybe more than we originally anticipated there with the Chargers, and I think Lad McConkey is going to be a guy who gets some opportunities. So I've been drafting him a lot. I have, look, my my good friend and wide receiver whisperer, Matt Harmon, has told me that I should start to buy into Keon Coleman a little bit more in Buffalo as well.
Hmm.
So I when Matt speaks, I tend to listen to him. So I'm trying to get my mind right and draft a little bit more Keon Coleman this offseason too.
Yeah, Keon Coleman is a good one to watch. I would say Jermaine Burton is another one to keep an
Yes,
eye
that's
on
another
in
one.
Cincinnati.
Yes. Hmm.
He is someone that is kind of stepping in that role, and maybe they're grooming him to replace maybe T. Higgins as the wide receiver too. Once they have to make decisions on who to pay. Um, Final young guy that I would say I'm kind of buzzing on is keep an eye on Brian Thomas Jr. in Jacksonville. And the only reason I say keep an eye on him is he is the vertical stretch guy that they've been lacking. His last year at LSU, he had 7 touchdowns. So he might be the red zone weapon that can sneak in and give you some fantasy points just being a touchdown scorer because that's what he does. He scores touchdowns.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that too. He's another guy that I like, and I'm glad you mentioned Jermaine Burton because that one slipped my mind. But he's one I mean, look, you know this, Buck. I know he had some off field issues, and that's sort of what pushed him down in the draft. But people were talking about him as a day one talent, so the talent is there. And you put him in there with Jamar Chase and T Higgins, and get Joe Burrow at quarterback. Absolutely love what he could potentially do.
Yeah. So now let's put together this ultimate team. Like if we're thinking about like just putting together an ultimate fantasy team, if you had your druthers and you could walk away with the perfect fantasy team, give me a list of names that you put on that.
All right. I mean, look, so I'm going to go, obviously, in the first round, you're talking about going chalky. I still love Christian McCaffrey at the top of drafts, right? I mean, just there are very few people who can do what he can do. And so if I got the number one pick, I'm drafting McCaffrey pretty much all day. I'm going to come back around and sometime in the second round, if I can get Brandon Ayuk kind of in the later part of the second round, I
Ooh.
want to do that.
Okay.
Look, all his potential unhappiness with San Francisco aside, he is the
They
number
don't
one
want him.
receiver in that offense. I look, I know what he's saying. I just know that when he's on the field, him and Brock Purdy work well together, and they feature him in that offense. And that's all I care. Like, I don't care about his feelings right now. I just care about his production. That's what. So I like him there in the second round. If I'm going third round, then I would probably look at a DJ Moore, maybe Devonta Smith if he's still there, although he probably
Mhm.
wouldn't be. But a DJ Moore in that spot, I think, is great as a second wide receiver because he's the one guy that I think gets a lot of work. I think Rome Odunze and Keenan Allen may sort of eat off each other's plates, but I think DJ Moore is a guy that you can certainly believe in the third round. Now, fourth round, I might be
Mhm.
looking at a tight end. If Sam Laporta is still there, I would make that move. But otherwise, I'm looking at maybe a Travis Kelce or possibly a Trey McBride, depending on how the board falls. But I want to try to get my tight end in that fourth round. So at that point, I got a running back, I got two receivers, I've got a tight end. Now in the fifth round, it's sort of up for grabs. I like Jaden Reed. I know I talked about the
Mhm.
Packer offense being
Yeah.
somewhat frustrating, but if there's a guy that I can count on, I do think it's Jaden Reed in that offense. And again, at that point, he's my third wide receiver, so I don't need him to be great every single week there. So then round six, I think we're going back to the running back spot. And at that point, actually, you know what? No, in the sixth round, I can look and a lot of times CJ Stroud is there. So I can take CJ Stroud. I can get my quarterback
Oh yeah.
out of the way at that point, feel really, really good about my quarterback spot. Then in round seven, it depends. I might go with a David Montgomery there, get my second running back because I do like his
Mhm.
opportunity. I mean, him and Jameer Gibbs worked really well together last year. So I can get David Montgomery in the seventh round. In the eighth round, I'll probably back it up with another running back and get Jalen Warren, who I really like in Pittsburgh because he's
Nice.
going to catch the
Pittsburgh.
football. Yeah, so I'll get Jalen Warren in the eighth round, and then from here on out, I'm sort of going some kind of combination of best available. So like Raheem Mostert might be available in round 9, maybe in round 10. I like a Khalil Shakir or a Brian Robinson actually in round
Two
10.
good picks. Yeah, two good
Yeah,
picks.
so then round 11 we're talking about who are we looking at here? Maybe let's see. If I would go Jacoby Myers, Brandon Cooks, maybe in a spot like that. But I think at that point you're starting to look best available. So some of the guys I like a little bit later. Let's see. Jahan Dotson. I like a little bit later.
Yes.
I'm really intrigued by the Washington offense this year. What is Cliff going to do with Jaden Daniels? With he's got Terry McLaurin, he's got Jahan Dotson, so I like him late. Willing to take a shot somewhere in the late rounds on Marshawn Lloyd in Green Bay. This might be my Cardinal and gold colored
It
glasses talking to you a little
it
bit.
is. A little bit. That's okay though. It's nothing wrong. It's
But
nothing wrong
yeah,
with loving your squad. I get it.
yeah. But Marshawn Lloyd there behind Josh Jacobs in Green Bay. Jermaine Burton, we talked about. He's another guy that I'll try to get in the late rounds. And then, you're at the end, I'm not dart throwing, but I'm taking young guys with upside near the end of the draft. So I mentioned, Jermaine Burton, Ray Davis is coming late in drafts. I'm not totally out on Wan'Dale Robinson yet in New York. We'll see what happens there. Maybe a Marvin Mims in Denver
Marvin
or something
Mims
like
is a
that.
good one. Marvin Mims
So
is a good one just because of the pecking order in the Broncos offense. Marvin Mims earned his way. And look, let's be honest, he bumped out Jerry Jeudy. So I would
yeah,
think that Sean Payton has big plans for Marvin Mims. Like, Marcus, this is always so fun, man. Like, the fantasy football space is such an intriguing one.
yeah.
You and the crew do a great job of keeping everyone updated. Let's plug the podcast. I know you guys haven't ramped it up fully, but where can they find our content?
Yeah, we're starting to ramp up just like everybody else. It's training camp for all of us. But yeah, the NFL Fantasy Football Podcast. We're doing it probably a couple times a week. So you can find that wherever you download podcasts. And this summer we started doing a fun live stream on YouTube called the Fantasy Cheat Sheet that we pop on for about half an hour on Thursdays. And we talk some fantasy, we talk some non-fantasy, we talk movies, pop culture, the whole thing. And then it's a chance for us to interact too, because we get people in the chat asking us questions, and we get to sort of interact with those folks there. So every Thursday, streaming on YouTube is the Fantasy Cheat Sheet.
Okay, well, I got to go in there. I got to hear some of that pop culture references you guys are
Yeah,
talking about. I love getting a little more than my fantasy. If I can get fantasy plus, I'm all
there it
about
is.
it. And we are all about it on the Move the Sticks. Thanks so much for coming on, Marcus. It's been great. Guys, this is the Lad podcast for the week. Move the Sticks will come back the following week. We'll come back next Monday. Have all kinds of new content for you. Until then, stay locked. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks for tuning in for Move the Sticks.